Canada may soon have to confront a question it thought had largely disappeared. Could one of its provinces actually leave? In Alberta, a separatist campaign has gathered enough momentum to force the issue onto the ballot. Later this year, voters will be asked whether the province should remain in Canada or begin the legal process towards a binding vote on independence. For many, the case is deeply partisan. Conservative parties have governed Alberta almost continuously since 1971, while Liberal governments at the federal level have generally supported stricter environmental rules and tighter limits on fossil fuel development. To the folks in Ottawa, those policies are necessary to reduce emissions, but to Albertans they look like an attempt to weaken the industry that pays the province's bills. And so, separatists believe Alberta would be wealthier and more powerful on its own. However, independence would be far more complicated than leaving Canada and keeping the oil. Foremost, Alberta is landlocked. Its pipelines cross Canadian territory, and its economy depends on trade agreements negotiated by Ottawa. Meanwhile, Indigenous nations hold treaty rights that the province cannot simply ignore. But the greater risk may lie beyond. Even if the referendum fails and Alberta remains part of Canada, the change in federal policy could breathe new life into separatist movements elsewhere, especially in battle-tested Quebec. A country that nearly split once never quite forgets where the fault line runs. The fact that Alberta is even talking about leaving Canada says a lot about the political and economic uncertainty right now. And in uncertain times, gold tends to get more traction. That brings us farther south to Nevada, home to some of the most prolific gold districts in the world. Gold itself has also rebounded more than 10% from its yearly low, and one company starting to get noticed is Westward Gold, today's sponsor. Westward is a junior exploration company with nearly 95 square kilometers of claims across two projects along Nevada's Cortez and Carlin gold trends. Earlier this month, Westward released new results from its Toyabe Hills project, including a 13.4-meter interval grading 6.55 grams of gold per metric ton, and the market reacted positively. Even after that move, Westward still has a market cap below 50 million Canadian dollars. So this remains a small cap exploration story. The company is now using the latest results to refine its geological model and continue drilling to see whether the mineralization extends deeper, with more results expected in the coming weeks. If you want to follow the story yourself, Westward trades as WG on the CSE and WGLIF on the OTCQB, and you can find the company at westwardgold.com. This is not financial advice, so as always, do your own due diligence before making any investment. Alberta's separatist movement is not new. For decades, many Albertans have argued that the province sends too much money to Ottawa while receiving too little political influence in return. Much of that frustration comes from energy. You see, Alberta sits at the center of Canada's oil and gas industry. Energy production supports jobs and much of the provincial economy. Federal rules affecting pipelines, carbon emissions, or oil exports therefore have a direct impact on Alberta's finances. And this has repeatedly placed Alberta at odds with Liberal governments in Ottawa. The conflict became especially intense under Justin Trudeau, who served as Prime Minister from 2015 until 2025. His government introduced climate measures and energy policies that were deeply unpopular in Alberta. Those disputes over pipelines and federal authority reinforced the idea that Alberta's interests were being ignored. Then, in 2022, the provincial government passed the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which provided Alberta with a legal framework to challenge federal measures it considered unconstitutional. The law stopped well short of separation, but it reflected Alberta's growing resolve to push back against federal authority. And it was in this political climate that the modern grassroots independence movement began to take shape. At large, support for separation often increases when the Liberal Party controls the federal government. It rose during the disputes of the late 2010s and early 2020s, then climbed again after the federal election of April 2025. That recent election produced an unexpected Liberal comeback under Mark Carney. However, while many Albertans assumed Carney would continue Trudeau's policy, the new Prime Minister instead moved towards the political centre and worked to repair relations with Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith. In November 2025, for instance, Ottawa and Alberta signed a Memorandum of Understanding to strengthen cooperation and support the province's energy sector. This reconciliation eased some of the separatist pressure, but an even bigger twist came from the United States. President Donald Trump repeatedly mocked Canadian sovereignty and imposed tariffs on Canadian goods. But the rhetoric backfired and actually strengthened Canadian unity. Even some Albertans who supported separation became less willing to weaken Canada at a time when it was facing an increasingly hostile neighbor. Then, the separatist leadership and movement stepped into another controversy. In late 2025 and early 2026, representatives of the Alberta Prosperity Project, which is the group leading the separatist campaign, met with members of the Trump administration. They reportedly discussed how an independent Alberta could benefit the United States and how Washington might help the separatist cause. When the news broke, it immediately raised suspicions that the movement wanted Alberta to become part of the United States. The separatist leaders denied the claim, insisting they wanted Alberta to become independent, not join the United States. But the damage was already done. Many Albertans distrust Ottawa, but they are also wary of Washington interfering in Canadian politics. The meeting therefore triggered a backlash, even among some supporters of independence. These swings in support help explain why the separatist movement has never grown beyond a committed minority. Most contemporary polls place support for independence somewhere between 25% and 33%, but it has never come close to maintaining a majority. And so, while the separatists have enough support to force the issue onto the political agenda, they do not yet have enough support to win. Keeping track of all these developments can be difficult. At Caspian Report, we use our own algorithm to track events worldwide and measure how each situation evolves by weighing new developments against one another. That same feature is now built into Delta Sweep. More on this later. October 19th is Alberta's date with destiny. Ballot question 10 will ask whether the province should remain part of Canada or begin the legal process needed to hold a binding separation referendum. The wording is important. Albertans are not being asked to approve independence right away. They are being asked whether the government should begin preparing for a second legally binding vote at some point in the future. For added context, Canadian provinces can organize their own referendums. In 2025, Smith's government lowered the number of signatures required for a citizen petition, making it easier for campaigns to qualify. But even if the separatist vote wins and the parliament accepts the results, Alberta would then have to begin a much longer process to break away. Foremost, Alberta would have to negotiate with Ottawa and the other provinces over the terms of its exit. These negotiations would cover almost every part of governance, including borders, debt, citizenship, pensions, federal property, natural resources, trade, and taxation. In addition, independence would also require an amendment to the Canadian Constitution, which could take many more years. Needless to say, the road to independence is a complicated one. But even if Alberta never leaves Canada, the attempt itself will leave a mark. This then is why Ottawa is now trying its best to prevent support for independence from growing. Efforts are being made to repair relations with Alberta and take the province's energy demands more seriously. The clearest example is a proposed new oil pipeline from Alberta to the coast of British Columbia. It would carry around 1 million barrels per day to overseas markets, largely following the existing Trans Mountain corridor. Prime Minister Mark Carney referred the project to the Major Projects Office, bringing it one step closer to reality. As of this writing, the proposal remains at an early stage, but its continued progress forward sets an important milestone. It is no longer merely an Alberta project searching for private investors. It now has the direct involvement of both the federal and provincial governments. Ironically, the threat of separation may have helped Alberta win the very concessions that weakened the case for independence. The economic argument for independence sounds simple. Separatists say Alberta would keep more of its tax revenue, escape federal environmental rules, and gain complete control over its oil and gas industry. However, if Brexit proved anything, it is that leaving an economic union is never that simple. Leaving Canada would bring about a whole new set of costs. The first problem would be uncertainty. The secession process could last for years. During that time, companies would not know what taxes they would pay, what trade rules would apply, or which government would regulate them. As a result, some investments would be delayed while others could move elsewhere. Alberta would also need to build institutions that are currently provided by the Canadian government. Federal agencies, social programs, and administrative services would have to be replaced by new provincial bodies. Doing so would require substantial funding, workers, and years of preparation. Trade would become more complicated as well. Alberta currently benefits from the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement because it is part of Canada. But an independent Alberta would not automatically remain inside that agreement. It would likely need to negotiate new access with Canada, the United States, and Mexico all together, which again could take years. Yet perhaps Alberta's greatest weakness would be geography. The province may have enormous oil and gas reserves, but it has no coastline. Its energy reaches the outside world through pipelines that cross other Canadian provinces or connect to the United States. An independent Alberta would need to renegotiate access to those routes. Almost counterintuitively, the province would immediately become dependent on cooperation with the same Canadian government it had just left. Ottawa and the other provinces could demand fees, conditions, or political concessions in exchange for pipeline access. So, while independence would give Alberta formal control over its resources, it would not give the province a new route to the sea. Another major obstruction for Alberta would be the Indigenous treaties. First Nations leaders could argue that their treaties were signed with the Crown and Canada, not with an independent Alberta. As a result, some Indigenous communities might refuse to join the new country, while others could demand control over their lands or separate negotiations over their political status. Before long, Alberta's separatist movement could face separatist movements of its own among Indigenous nations. That dispute could even involve the monarchy. King Charles reportedly expressed concern about Alberta's separatist movement after meeting First Nations leaders in March 2026. The king is unlikely to decide Alberta's future himself, but his involvement shows how the dispute could expand far beyond provincial politics. Taken together, weak public support, economic disruption, landlocked geography, constitutional negotiations, and Indigenous opposition make Alberta's independence highly unlikely. Yet for all this, Alberta may not even be Canada's most serious separatist front. That distinction goes to Quebec. On October 5th, it will hold provincial elections. The pro-independence Parti Québécois remains in first place, but its lead has narrowed. A poll conducted in June placed the party at 30%, followed closely by the Quebec Liberals at 27%. Meanwhile, fewer than half of decided voters said their choice was final. The political mood is increasingly uneasy. Quebec is a political powder keg waiting to burst. It already held 2 referendums on sovereignty. The first in 1980 failed by a comfortable margin. The second in 1995 nearly succeeded. The campaign to remain in Canada won with barely more than 50% of the vote. Parti Québécois leader Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon has promised to organize a third referendum if his party wins power. Even if he delays that vote, a Parti Québécois government would probably demand greater autonomy from Ottawa. Quebec currently controls many areas of policy, but the party would seek to expand those powers even further. Doing so would stir up a hornet's nest. Relations between Quebec and the federal government would nosedive. To put this in perspective, Alberta and Quebec have very different reasons for wanting independence. Alberta's movement is mainly about oil, taxes, pipelines, and federal regulation. Quebec's movement, however, is tied to language, culture, and the belief that Quebec forms a nation of its own. Alberta has never come close to producing a pro-independence majority like Quebec's. So, while Alberta is unlikely to become an independent country and even less likely to join the United States, the separatist campaign may trigger outsized unintended consequences. It has already placed a separation question on the ballot, pushed Ottawa towards a new pipeline partnership, and deepened disputes over Indigenous treaties. Most importantly, it has placed the idea of provincial independence back at the center of Canadian politics. Alberta may never leave Canada, but by peering through the window of separation, others may start knocking. Before we wrap up, a quick word about Delta Sweep's new feature, Pulse. This is our predictive situations algorithm that takes the constant stream of news around a situation and assesses whether it increases tensions or moves things towards an off-ramp. For instance, in Canada's case, in roughly a year, the country has had an election, a memorandum, a tariff war, and one meeting in Washington. Using Pulse, we noticed how the situation kept escalating, and that's when we knew it was worth paying attention to. So, rather than following isolated headlines, Pulse focuses on context. It follows entire situations and tells you exactly what changed since you last looked. Every development is sorted by direction, either it's improving or worsening. That simplicity tells you instantly which way a crisis is leaning. You can follow existing flashpoints from Canada to Taiwan or create your own. Pulse will then monitor the situation and notify you the moment the state of play changes. Go to deltasweep.com, sign up for the free trial, and explore it for yourself. Thank you for your time, and Saul.